Protected squares. About 10 years ago, I was fortunate enough to come across a course by Maurice Ashley, and it was a 3-volume DVD set. And the first one of that is the topic of protected squares, and he coins that phrase. And it was such a unique topic to me at the time, and I've never really heard another master even comment on this particular theme in the game, that I thought I would share it because in the title of his course, as you can see here, what Grandmasters Don't See, this is a problem that goes right up to the master level. And in this course, which is over 4 hours, he covers multiple games from master analysis where they have completely missed the idea of the theme around a protected square. So I highly recommend you get this course if you're able to. So what is a protected square? So the idea is that it's a square that is protected by one of the opponent's pawns, or in the extreme example, two opponent's pawns. And what Maurice is saying in the course is that often we don't even evaluate. So meaning it's not like we looked at a candidate move but then improperly rejected it by not calculating correctly. What he's saying is that we would never consider moving anything to, in this case, d5 if we're playing the white pieces because of these two black pawns. It's like it can't possibly be right, so we're not even going to look at that, and we'll just simply look at some other theme in the position and concentrate on a developing move or concentrating on controlling the center or some other theme. And so, as he's pointing out in his course, it's a very difficult problem to overcome because it seems so unnatural. And like anything else in chess, what makes the game so beautiful is sometimes it's correct, and there's a reason to do it, and in a lot of cases it wouldn't be, as you would expect, because the obvious drawback is that one of these pawns is going to be able to recapture. And so the obvious question is when or why would this ever be correct? And so as I've and if you've analyzed your games with a computer as I do after you play them, you've probably seen this theme in your games. And you're like, wow, that was a square that I would never have considered moving into, and that was a theme that I didn't even think about. So when you're asking the question, how or why would this ever be correct? Often what you'll find is there's a theme around this move of something into the protected square that gives you more than the drawback of the move. So to go back to Bobby Fischer's expression, you have to give up squares to get squares. Sometimes there is a theme where what you're getting from it is more valuable than what you're giving up. So if we just look at it like this, it just seems like the pawn can be recaptured, and whichever pawn recaptures, it's backed up by its friend on the sixth file, and we just simply lost a pawn. Or in a more extreme case, it might even be a minor piece, which seems impossible. It's like, why would we ever do that? And often what you'll find is there's a theme running around these squares, often related to the move of the pawn or the piece into the protected square, that opens up something that has some theme around it. So as an example, if we go back to the idea that we might push the pawn here, we can see that there are some pretty significant targets behind these pawns. So it's not very simple for black to just recapture without an issue. If he recaptures on this side, we would simply win the queen, because often the queen in black setup could wind up on c7. This move, of course, isn't even allowed because the king, of course, is pinned. The other thing that's happened here is that I put the bishops, and obviously this is an artificially constructed position, but just to illustrate that maybe the black king is over on g8 or g7, and this push of the pawn means that our bishops that I've placed here on b2 and f2 now have, and of course they're on the same color, but it's just for illustrative purposes, is now open on this diagonal to potentially go after the king, go after something that maybe a heavy piece that's sitting on one of these squares. And in the same way, the opposite cutting diagonal is now open as well. So meaning that there's usually a theme as to when this is going to be correct for, in this case, the white side to do it. there's usually a theme revolving around it as to why it might be correct. So if we were to look at the knight now, most of us as developing players, we would never even consider this. Like, how could that be right? Well, it hits the queen right away. If there's recapture, we would win the queen with our rook. And of course, again, the other way on the e file, that knight is completely safe. So when you see a protected square, Maurice's point was don't just simply reject candidate moves out of hand and consider that there's no way that they could be right. Take a look and look at these themes having to do with the diagonals, having to do with control over the long files, and see if there isn't something that might be available to you that you could consider, because otherwise you'll completely miss this opportunity. And so if you've developed well and you have your rooks in a good place, that could be a theme. And of course the diagonals could come back into place. So just to demonstrate this, we'll look at where the first game I featured in my master analysis series in the playlist that focuses on a game by Tori, who's playing the white pieces. And in this case, if we were to have this with the white pieces, we would look at this and say, okay, we're pretty well developed. The rook's in an attacking spot, but it's on the fifth rank, and maybe we want to make use of that or not. But we might consider a developing move. We might say, okay, the queen has pretty nice control over c4. Maybe we should just do b4 and just kind of expand space and apply some pressure on the queen side and etc. We like our rook on d1. That seems pretty reasonable. Maybe we just simply play a king move, get it off the back file, get it safe, right? But what Tori does in this position is he calculates an idea that a lot of us wouldn't even consider, and it's d5. And so you look at this and you're like, wow, how could that ever be right? Because C, of course, can recapture and again, there's no pin with our king down here, or sorry, his king up here or anything. So it could be E recaptures, ignoring the pin for now on the queen. We'll get to that in a second. But in a normal circumstance, of course, the knight could recapture the queen. Anyway, there are a lot of ways to recapture. So you're looking at that as a protected square, and you're like, wow, that can't possibly be right. But going back to the themes of what I was talking about on the board here, where you look at what could be available and what's not, look at the various things that have been opened. So the first thing that comes to mind right away is our queen on c3 is, of course, pinning the black king. So this knight is now, which in normal circumstances would have good control over these light squares, now is not able to do anything because it's pinned. It's also, although our pawn has now become a target on d5, it's also now supported by the bishop. The other theme is that now that we've gone to our fifth rank, our rook over here, which is now not currently under attack, can go to this, the protection of this as well. So we've actually moved on to a square where we actually have new support. And so the idea is that if and let's just look at how the game continued. There's c takes, but then what happens is white again goes into a protected square with knight takes, and that's an even tougher one to see because you're like, well, the pawn could just simply recapture. But the problem is that if e recaptures, look at what's taken place. So this knight is still pinned. We have both these rooks activated. The bishop could potentially attack there too, and we can simply slide across with g rook onto the d file. We've now doubled our rooks. The knight again still cannot do anything. This rook on h6 is completely out of the play. Black brought it into here to defend the king side, but it can't participate in this chaos that's going in the center right now. The queen has to get out of the way. Black decides to go to c6, but now this is hanging, right? So if we just simply capture the bishop on d7, all of this has taken place with this control over the central files, with the knight here not even being able to participate because it's pinned by the queen, and the rook completely out of play. So if this were able to be continued, the game ends on a tactic. The other thing that happens is that this rook, of course, is protected by the other rook because the knight can't move. And we've just hit a tempo on the queen because our bishop is on f3 and it's protected by the queen on c3. So now the queen's got a major issue. if we're allowed to continue, eventually we could bring one of our rooks potentially to d6, again threatening the queen, but more importantly, threatening the double attack on f6. So white has achieved not only a material advantage, but a huge initiative by expanding his chess vision, and instead of just looking at other parts of the board and more positional type developing moves that don't really have the right emphasis, like a4 or b4 in the situation, and saying, wait a minute, d5 is not only a candidate move, but it's the move that is going to win the game several moves from now. So that's an introduction to protected squares. I highly recommend you check out that course by Maurice Ashley. It's very valuable, and it, as I said in the introduction, it shows that this lack of our ability to see opportunities like this does in fact go right up to the master level.